Take a deep breath and try to visualize this scene with me. Because what happened in Revolution Square in Tehran over the last 12 hours is not just an act of propaganda. It's a grim omen of what may be to come. Imagine yourself walking through one of Iran's most symbolic squares. The air is heavy, laden with a tension you can feel on your skin. Suddenly, you look up and are confronted with a colossal, newly unveiled billboard that seems to scream to the world. The image is visceral, worthy of a cinematic nightmare of extreme realism. In it, an American aircraft carrier is engulfed in colossal flames, with twisted metal and black smoke rising to the sky. But the detail that truly chills the blood is the deck. There, sailors' bodies are scattered among trails of blood that cruelly and calculatedly have been drawn to form the stripes of the American flag. Beneath this visual carnage, a phrase echoes like a biblical ultimatum. If you sow the wind, you will reap the whirlwind. Feel for a moment the weight of this message. We are not talking about empty political rhetoric. We are talking about a regime that is psychologically preparing its population for the worst. This billboard is the direct and immediate response to what is happening right now in the deep waters. The USS Abraham Lincoln's carrier strike group sailing at full speed towards the Persian Gulf. Can you grasp the gravity of this? We are entering a 72-hour window that has the potential to redraw the map of the Middle East and shake the economy of each of us. That feeling of, "this is far from me," disappears when we understand that the whirlwind mentioned in Tehran has already begun to blow. Put yourself for a moment in the place of someone observing that image and knowing that at any second, the horizon could be illuminated by something very real. This is the point of no return, and you need to understand exactly how we got here before the next chapter of this story is written in fire. The Iron Fleet on the horizon. That billboard in Tehran is not a delusion. It reflects the fear that arises when you look to the horizon and see the silhouette of one of the most formidable weapons ever built by humankind. The USS Abraham Lincoln is not just a ship. It is a floating city of steel and nuclear power, a fortress that carries with it the will of a superpower. As you hear these words, this colossus is cutting through the waters, leaving behind the South China Sea with a single destination, the Persian Gulf. President Trump himself, in a live broadcast from Force One, confirmed what many feared. The order has been given. Imagine the scale of this. We are talking about a supercarrier carrying 90 combat-ready aircraft. Among them are the FA-18 Super Hornet fighters, capable of hitting targets with surgical precision, and the EA-18G Growlers, veritable electronic ghosts designed to blind enemy radars before the first shot is even heard. Surrounding them is an escort of guided missile destroyers, armed with tomahawks that can travel 1,500 kilometers to find their target. It's a show of force that makes the ground tremble, even kilometers away. But the Pentagon didn't stop there. In addition to the strike group, the skies over the region began to be filled with F-15E Strike Eagles. These are the most advanced fighter bombers in the American arsenal, equipped with bunker buster bombs, specifically designed to penetrate dozens of meters of concrete and rock to destroy underground nuclear facilities. All of this is supported by a network of aerial refueling tanker aircraft, strategically positioned so that this fleet can operate 24 hours a day without ever needing to lower its guard. Feel the pressure of this moment. This is the largest military mobilization in the region since June 2025. Trump is sending a message that needs no translation. Stop, or we will make you stop. However, the problem with moving a mountain of iron into such a confined space is that, to those on the other side, it doesn't just seem like a warning, but an invitation to chaos. And Iran, as we saw on that blood-stained billboard, has already made it clear that it doesn't intend to just watch the fleet arrive. The muffled cry. Iran from within. You know that uncomfortable silence that precedes a storm? That's exactly how Iran feels right now, but inside, the country is on fire. To understand why the regime is so aggressive on the outside, you need to look at what's happening in their own backyard. On December 28, 2025, something broke. It wasn't just an isolated protest in a square. It was a cry for help that echoed throughout all 31 provinces of the country. Imagine waking up and realizing that the money you've saved your whole life is now worthless. The rial, the local currency, has plummeted alarmingly, reaching 1,200,000 for every US dollar. Ordinary families, people like you and me, suddenly found themselves unable to buy bread, milk, or meat. Even the bazaar merchants, who for decades had been the backbone of support for the regime, closed their doors and took to the streets. But make no mistake, this revolt isn't just about empty stomachs. It's about 40 years of a pressure cooker that finally exploded. There is a deep pain in seeing billions of dollars invested in ballistic missiles and proxy wars in Syria and Yemen, while the sons and daughters of the nation itself starve or die in conflicts they did not choose. The Iranian people are tired of being the fuel for an ideology that puts no food on the table. And how did the regime respond? In the only way it knows how, with a clenched fist. They cut off the internet, plunging the country into a digital blackout so the world wouldn't see what was happening. In the dark, the violence was relentless. Reports from activists indicate that more than 5,000 protesters lost their lives, but the truth is that the real number could be much, much higher. We simply don't know, because the silence imposed by Tehran is absolute. It was in this scenario of human despair that President Trump published that short but explosive message. Help is on the way. For those in power in Iran, that phrase sounded like a declaration of internal war. They know that a hungry and angry people, backed by a superpower, is the greatest threat they have ever faced. Economic checkmate. While the engines of the USS Abraham Lincoln roar at sea, another war, much quieter and perhaps more lethal, is being waged in banking terminals and foreign trade offices. Trump knows that to subdue a regime, it's not always necessary to fire the first missile. Sometimes it's enough to shut off the world's taps. And that's exactly what he did when he announced a measure that shook the foundations of global trade. 25% tariffs on any country that dares to do business with Tehran. Put yourself for a moment in the position of a leader in Beijing or New Delhi. China is Iran's largest trading partner, importing hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil every day to fuel its gigantic economy. However, China also exports more than $500 billion worth of goods to the United States every year. It's a cruel and immediate mathematical calculation. Trump essentially put the world against the wall and asked, "What is more valuable to you? Access to Iran's cheap oil or access to the largest consumer market on the planet?" This economic checkmate isolates Iran in a way we have rarely seen in modern history. When a nation is cut off from the global banking system, it becomes an island of despair. This is why the rial has melted and medicines have disappeared from the shelves. For the average citizen in Tehran, the irony is painful. The support promised by the West comes with pressure that makes daily life almost unbearable. But here's the critical point you need to understand. This strategy is not just about punishment, but about forcing an internal choice. By suffocating the economy, Trump is trying to accelerate the regime's collapse without needing a ground invasion. It's a high-risk gamble. If the money stops flowing altogether, the regime could crumble, destroyed by the very fury of its people. But if the pressure is excessive and there is no escape route, a cornered animal tends to attack with everything it has. And the place where this attack is most likely to happen is a small stretch of ocean you know well. The Strait of Hormuz, the Labyrinth of Hormuz. If you look at a map of the Middle East, you'll see a small passage that looks like the neck of a bottle connecting the Persian Gulf to the rest of the world. That's the Strait of Hormuz. Imagine that through this corridor, which is only 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, passes 21% of all the oil consumed on the planet daily. If this flow stops, the global economy suffers an instant heart attack. And this is where the game becomes dangerously physical. Iran controls the entire northern coast of this strait. They don't need a giant conventional navy to wreak havoc. Over the years, they've built what they call forward defense, a network of fortified bunkers hidden in the coastal mountains, packed with anti-ship missiles. But the real danger is their swarm tactics. Imagine hundreds of small, fast vessels armed with explosives and missiles attacking from all directions at once. For a colossus like the USS Abraham Lincoln, operating in those waters is like trying to maneuver a Ferrari through a dark, trap-filled alley. Furthermore, Iran has invested heavily in underwater drone technology, smart mines and small submersibles that can strike a ship's hull without warning. They have allies, like the Houthis in Yemen, who have already proven capable of targeting oil tankers with precision. If Iran decides to lock the door to Hormuz, the price of oil could double overnight, and every U.S. Navy vessel in the Gulf becomes a sitting target. The Pentagon knows this. They vividly remember a war game held in 2002 called the Millennium Challenge, where a simulation showed that Iranian asymmetric tactics could sink an entire fleet in a matter of days. Trump has stated that he has a huge fleet on its way, but he also knows that in Hormuz, the size of the ship doesn't always guarantee victory. It's a labyrinth where cutting-edge technology clashes with the brutality of geography, and the slightest miscalculation can set the ocean ablaze. The nuclear ghost and the scar of June. To understand Trump's urgency and Israel's hesitation, we need to go back in time just a few months, to June 2025. At that time, the world held its breath when the United States and Israel launched a coordinated operation against 3 of Iran's main nuclear facilities. The objective was simple, but ambitious: to delay Tehran's nuclear program by at least 2 years, destroying centrifuges and collapsing underground enrichment tunnels. At the time, partial success was celebrated, but today we know that the nuclear ghost never went away. In January 2026, reality slammed its fist on the table of diplomacy. Iran's Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, openly stated that everything that was damaged has already been rebuilt, and this is not just bravado. Intelligence sources confirmed that Iran has resumed uranium enrichment at hidden facilities that the June attacks didn't even reach. To make matters worse, the International Atomic Energy Agency has been denied access to crucial sites. In other words, Iran isn't just walking. They are racing toward the capability to produce an atomic weapon. This creates an impossible dilemma for the White House. If Trump doesn't act now, Iran could achieve so-called nuclear disruption within 6 to 12 months. But acting means starting a full-blown war. Even Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has always advocated a hard line, faces a grim calculation. Israel spent so many interceptor missiles defending itself against Iranian attacks in June that its air defense stockpiles are critically low. They need time to rebuild their shields before the sky fills with fire again. The constant fear is that the Iron Dome system will be overwhelmed by a massive attack. We are playing a game of chess where the board is about to explode. On one side, the fear of an Iranian nuclear bomb. On the other, the fear that the attempt to prevent this bomb will light a fuse that no one can extinguish. The scar from June still hurts, and the fear is that the next wound will be too deep to heal. Rhymes of history and the weight of tomorrow. There's a famous saying that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. If we go back 47 years to 1979, we'll see the roots of what we're experiencing today. At that time, Iran was ruled by the Shah, a close ally of the United States who was placed in power with the help of the CIA decades earlier. He modernized the economy but ruled with an iron fist, crushing any opposition. When the people finally took to the streets, they didn't just want bread, they wanted sovereignty. The result? A radical revolution that transformed an ally into a fierce enemy for almost half a century. Today, some in Washington believe that airstrikes could weaken the regime to the point where the Iranian people would finish what they started in the protests. But history gives us bloody warnings. Look at Iraq in 2003. The government fell in 3 weeks, but what followed was 15 years of insurgency and the rise of extremist groups. Consider Libya in 2011. An air intervention helped topple a dictator, but left behind a decade of civil war and a divided country. Iran is a nation of 89 million people, with a highly armed and loyal ideological army. An external intervention could, ironically, unite the people around the government they hate, simply out of wounded national pride. That's why 3 specific scenarios haunt Pentagon planners. The first is accidental war, a miscalculation, an anti-aircraft battery firing on a drone by mistake, and within hours the conflict spirals out of control. The second is the nationalist rally. Bombs fall and millions of demonstrators who previously shouted against the regime now shout against the invaders, strengthening Tehran's hardliners. And the third, perhaps the most terrifying, is full-blown regional war. In this last scenario, Iran would not be fighting alone. He would activate all his allies. Missiles hitting American bases in Kuwait and Qatar, Hezbollah rockets raining down on Israel, and the immediate closure of the Strait of Hormuz. In 48 hours, the entire Middle East would be engulfed in flames, and the price of oil would skyrocket to $200 a barrel, collapsing the global economy. Trump knows he is holding a lit match near an ocean of gasoline. The question is, does he believe he can extinguish the fire before everything explodes, or is he willing to gamble the future of millions on a roll of the dice? The decisive 72 hours. Everything we have discussed so far brings us back to this very second. The clock is not just ticking, it is accelerating. With the USS Abraham Lincoln strike group just 4 or 5 days away from the Persian Gulf, we have entered territory where every move, every word, and every market fluctuation matters. Trump faces an agonizing choice that will define his legacy and possibly the fate of an entire generation. Will he order the attacks, risking total war? Will he maintain the economic blockade, hoping the regime implodes? Or is there a secret diplomatic channel we haven't yet seen? In the next 48 to 72 hours, you need to be attentive to 4 key signs. First, watch for new missile tests by Iran. This will be the definitive sign that they do not intend to back down. Second, monitor the exact position of the American fleet. If it effectively enters the Gulf or remains in the Arabian Sea, we will know how imminent the threat of attack is. Third, keep an eye on the price of oil. Investors often know that war is coming even before the first shot is fired. And finally, watch the streets of Tehran. If the protests continue despite the repression, the regime will be at its weakest point. We are witnessing history being written in real time. What happens next could reshape the world as we know it, affecting everything from the price of fuel at your gas station to the stability of international borders. 8,000 kilometers may separate us from the Persian Gulf, but the waves of this shock will reach us all. Be prepared, stay informed, and keep your eyes on the horizon. Subscribe now so you don't miss any developments in this crisis, because I promise you, this story is far from over and the turmoil is only just beginning.